Interesting. So, Africa, I've rambled on about veganism for a while. I'm assuming you've never quite thought about that issue too much. Like, am I correct in that assumption?
You are correct. And is this where
Okay.
you convert me? Is this what this
This is
whole
the,
podcast was about?
this is where I try to challenge you on this issue.
Sure. No,
So,
yeah.
so you've like within your letter, right? You said you speak, you stand for human rights, right? And you stand for all, not just for people who share your skin color or your gender. You stand for all. But
For
the
all
issue
human
that
rights, yes.
yes, for everyone, right? But the issue that I'm seeing there is that you're limiting yourself, you're limiting your moral community to just human beings. So we speak about human rights, right? But what is the ethical basis for human rights, right? We say that, human rights, everyone gets it, like gets those rights, regardless of their race, gender, sexual orientation, and so on. But why? It's because these things are not morally relevant, right? These are differences that we have, but these are not morally relevant differences. So we recognize the differences, but we recognize that they're not morally relevant differences. So just as being non-racist, not anti-racist, just as being non-racist encompasses recognizing the difference, but recognizing that there are morally irrelevant differences, so too does the refusal of participating in the exploitation of animals encompass that recognizing that we're very different, right? A pig is very different to a human being, who is very different to a chicken, and so forth. So if we say that, this is the thing that gives human beings the moral value, that moral value, we'll have to name that trait. So if we say something like, we value human beings because they are intelligent, right? Because they have a certain level of intelligence, which a lot of people say, right? So the logic would have to work as such. If you say that that is the trait that gives human beings moral value, then it follows from your own reasoning that if we found a human being who lacks that trait, who is not as intelligent, who, because of some severe mental disability, has the intelligence level of a pig, that we would be justified to kill that human being. But that is a bizarre conclusion. So we have reached a bizarre conclusion. That must mean that our logic, that our premise, that intelligence is what gives someone moral worth, must be wrong, right? So, and another point that I want to press here is that this is not about human beings versus pigs, right? This is about the temporary taste pleasure of human beings versus the life and liberty of pigs, of chickens and goats and so on, right? So, so that's the point that I want to make, because there is sort of we must recognize our place, because this is scientific reality, that we are not the unrestricted owner of animals, but an animal ourselves, right? Human beings are animals, right? So that's the thing, right? That that's the basis on which I say that we must not contribute to unnecessary suffering. I'd just like to get your take on that.
I don't know if I have a take. I don't think I have a take on that. And I'm always very honest if I don't have anything useful to contribute to something, because especially when it comes to a topic like veganism, it's not something that I've ever really seriously considered. I think I tried it for maybe a few weeks, couple of years ago. But it was not a sort of moralistic decision. It wasn't because I was really intensely thinking about animals or anything like that. It was more so just a very surface level personal challenge. And I think for the most part of my life, I've just been focused on other things, and it's just not one of the things that has been at the forefront. Is it something that I would like to just find out more about? And to be honest, I've seen a few documentaries and still have not made the decision to go vegan. I just don't think it's something that I really committed to, even intellectually, to really understand. So I don't have any kind of hot take or any sort of disagreement or anything to offer up. I just think it's very interesting what you're putting forward, and I'm always open to listening, to understanding. But yeah, no, I'm not a vegan. No.
Right. So the thing is that you are not neutral on this issue, right? You are contributing to it. Right?
Okay.
So
I'm contributing to it. Yes.
Yeah, you're contributing to unnecessary suffering. So
Yes.
if you've not thought about it, because I've always viewed it as this, like, because like if someone has never thought about racism, right? The default position is not to contribute to racism. The default position is also not to be an anti-racist. The default position
Right.
is to be a non-racist. So
Yeah.
at the moment, you're not an like animal rights activist, which I don't expect you to be. I'm not asking you to be, but you're also not neutral. You've chosen a side here, which is to pay for their suffering. So given that you're doing that, given that you're causing suffering,
Right.
whenever we cause suffering, we justify it. So if a country decides to go on a war, they provide some kind of a justification for it. And
Yes.
maybe the justification is valid, maybe it's not. But they must be the ones to provide the justification. So in this case, what is your justification for contributing to this unnecessary suffering?
I don't think there's one that I can put forward right now. I actually think this is something that actually requires me to think about properly, not on the spot with the microphone in front of my face, because I think it would cheapen it in the sense that just for the case of this recording, I would have to think of something to present to you, and it might not actually be an honest truth. Because it's not something that I've thought about, like many other things that exist in the world that maybe you haven't thought about, that you might be directly or indirectly contributing to. It's not something that I've thought about. And I don't like to force myself to have to come up with something that's actually really important for me to sit with, for me to have to change my worldview, for me to actually sit with the discomfort that I feel and will feel when I really think about this in a different way. So there's nothing that I can contribute in terms of having a back and forth on this, because I think it actually deserves more time and more focus and me really understanding what I'm talking about. Yeah. But I do appreciate you putting that forward, because when I talk about honoring discomfort, even in the work that I do, it's not just this fucking fluffy thing that we say, and then when it happens, you're like, we get defensive and we want to shut it down. When I can feel discomfort in my body, especially hearing you saying, but you're contributing to suffering and it actually is a choice. The reality is that it is. It's not as if I don't have, especially when I think of the access that I have here in the Western world in general, the amount of options that I have to not have to eat meat. It's a very conscious choice. It's not as if I'm being forced to do it, or that I'm a child that has been raised in a family, even though culturally in the family that I was raised in, we just ate meat. It just was. You step into something that's already existing. But then when you do become conscious and an adult, you do have a choice. And I am an adult that has a choice, and I choose to consciously eat it. So hearing that being reflected back and feeling that discomfort and having to feel it and to actually think about it, I think it's a very important thing. And again, as I said, I'm just not the kind of person that will just flick an answer back to, it's something that I would think about. And when I do, I'll send you a voice note and maybe we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I do appreciate your honesty, right?
Yeah.
But before we talk about other things, I'd just like to make something very clear that since you do contribute to this unnecessary industry of unimaginable suffering, the kind of suffering that we cannot even imagine. I hate what you do, but I don't hate you, right? I think highly enough of you to know that you too are capable of reaching this moral standard, right? That's why I'm trying to have this conversation with you. If I thought that I was morally superior to you, that I'm superior to Africa Brooke, she just won't get it. Why would I ever try to have this conversation with you? I'd try to have that conversation with someone else or just keep it to myself. It's because I respect you. It's because I respect you that I try to have this conversation with you. So before we go on to another topic, I'd just like to leave you with that question about what is that trait that gives human beings moral worth, right? And maybe you don't have to answer it right now.
Sure. I'm listening and processing in real time.
What is that trait that gives human beings moral worth? Whatever trait you think it is. The reasoning is that since you've said that that is the trait that gives someone moral value, if we find a human being who lacks that trait, we would be justified to torture and kill that human being for our sensory pleasure, right? So if you'd be comfortable with torturing and killing a human being like that, then you're justified to contribute to this unnecessary suffering.
Right.
But otherwise, you're left with the uncomfortable conclusion that this must end and this must end now, right? And I really do appreciate
that's really worth. Yeah, that one just, you might have just done something there. Wow. I've never, you know what it is? I've never obviously consciously thought about that, but I know a lot of vegan people, but I've never heard it articulated in such a way. And undoubtedly, this is something that I'm going to be thinking about. I will not allow my ego to sort of push it out of the way, as in, who are you to try and tell me any of this? I'm very open. And I see you share things like this sometimes, but I think there's something about hearing someone that you do respect, as I respect you, which is why we're having this conversation, put something forward like that. And I actually appreciate the conviction and the commitment that you have. But yeah, that's worth thinking about. I'll be sitting with that for a while.
That's good.
Yeah.
So people don't generally. This is not the kind of reaction that I'm used to, right? People will just dodge the question. They will avoid the question. They'll just strawman the question. Consider someone like Sam Harris. When he's asked this question, he just answers a completely different question. You ask him, why are you contributing to this? He goes on to explain why human beings have greater moral worth than pigs. But that's not the question we're asking. We're asking, why do human taste pleasure have more importance than like the lives of pigs, right? And sometimes he'll say something like I'm just not healthy, like I couldn't manage to be healthy on a vegan diet. Are we seriously expected to believe that someone with the wealth and intelligence of Sam Harris cannot manage to find a proper way to be healthy on a vegan diet when I can, when so many people
the options are endless.
Yes, and he's a millionaire, right? This is not the kind of reaction I'm used to. So, yeah, it's a fresh change that I was not expecting this. So, yeah, it's a good.
Good.
It's a good experience.
And of course, if you can send me anything that's worth looking at or reading, I would really I'd really like to understand so that I can actually really think about this, because I think it is quite uncomfortable, especially if the person does believe themselves to be someone who is morally in tune, whatever that means. I think that's when the ego can come up really strong. And I can imagine with people like Sam Harris, who's also a very intellectual person, it's very easy to intellectualize your way out of it. But I just prefer to be honest. And I think some things, it's not worth me trying to curate some sort of answer or to push back when I haven't actually thought about it. And it's something that's worth thinking about. And at the same time, I think it's also dependent on the person that is putting forward the question and how they're doing that. Because maybe my response would have felt different if I had or even a part of me had assumed that you're trying to belittle me, or that you brought me into this conversation under false pretenses to sort of just bring something forward that I didn't expect or didn't know we were going to speak about, or if you're coming at it from a self-righteous place, or you're trying and forcing to get a particular response out of me, then maybe the response would have been different. Maybe I would have picked up on something like that. But I'm just generally open to understanding. So yeah.
So, well, I'd just like to